My name is Alara, and for all of my 27 years, I've been a study in watercolors while the rest of my family was painted in bold, decisive oils. I live in Port Blossom, a city that weeps with rain for 9 months of the year, a place where the air smells of damp earth and blooming rhododendrons. It suits me. I find beauty in the soft edges, the muted grays, the way sunlight has to fight its way through the clouds to dapple the pavement. I'm a poet and an illustrator, which means I spend my days trying to capture feelings that exist in the spaces between words and the light that falls on a forgotten teacup. I am the youngest of three. My brother, Julian, came first, a steady, reliable presence who learned early to navigate the currents of our family by simply staying out of the way. Then came Celeste, 2 years my senior, who arrived in the world as if she owned it. She was and is my parents' masterpiece. She has our mother's sharp, classical features and our father's formidable intellect. From her first steps, she was destined for greatness, a fact our parents never tired of repeating. Our family history is cataloged not in albums, but in a hierarchy of achievements. I remember my first solo art show, a small affair at a local gallery when I was 16. I had poured my soul into a series of charcoal sketches of the city's hidden alleyways. 2 days before the opening, my parents flew to the other side of the country because Celeste, a high school junior, was a finalist in a national mock trial competition. They sent a text that read, "Break a leg, sweetie." So proud of Celeste. My brother Julian was the only one who came. He bought my favorite piece, a sketch of a single, resilient weed growing through a crack in the pavement, and it still hangs in his study. The family motto, though never spoken aloud, was clear: what does this have to do with Celeste? When I was awarded a significant scholarship to a prestigious arts college, my father nodded distractedly, his eyes on an article about the groundbreaking sustainable materials Celeste was using in her university architecture program. When I published my first small collection of poems, my mother's response was, "That's lovely, dear. Did we tell you Celeste's firm, Ethelred and Finch, just won the bid for the new civic center?" Julian and I became quiet allies in the shadow of Celeste's sun. We communicated in shared glances over tense holiday dinners, in the silent passing of the salt when one of our accomplishments was glossed over. We were the background scenery to her starring role, the soft focus details that made her brilliance stand out in sharper relief. College was my first real breath of fresh air. For the first time, I was simply Alara. Not Celeste's little sister. Not the artistic one. Just me. I met Liam in a literature seminar on the Romantics. He was a history major with a quiet strength and eyes that seemed to see the parts of me I kept hidden. He didn't just listen to my poems, he heard the rhythm and the heartache beneath the words. Our love story wasn't a dramatic crescendo, it was a slow, beautiful unfurling, like a fern in the damp quiet of a forest. Liam's family was a revelation. They were loud and warm and wonderfully ordinary. The first time I had dinner at their house, his mother spent an hour asking me about my art, her questions full of genuine curiosity. His father, retired carpenter, later framed one of my illustrations and hung it in their living room with a level of pride my own parents reserved for Celeste's architectural awards. Being with them felt like coming home to a place I'd never known. After graduation, Liam and I settled in Port Blossom. He became a high school history teacher, shaping young minds with the same patience and care he showed me. I found a small studio with a large, north-facing window and began to build a life on my own terms. My weekly calls with my parents were a duty, brief and predictable, always circling back to Celeste's latest triumph. When Liam proposed on a foggy beach, the ring a simple, sea-smoothed piece of jade, my parents' reaction was muted. "Are you sure you're ready to settle down?" my mother asked, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Celeste is building an empire and you're getting married?" Our wedding was small and perfect, held in a grove of ancient cedar trees. Liam's family buzzed around us, creating a cocoon of joy. My parents contributed a check that felt more like a transaction than a gift. Celeste was my maid of honor, a role my mother insisted upon. Her toast was a masterclass in self-reference, weaving a narrative that was ostensibly about me but somehow featured her as the protagonist. A year later, when I discovered I was pregnant, Liam wept with joy. We spent evenings with our hands on my growing belly, whispering names into the quiet of our small apartment, dreaming of the person who was coming to join us. I waited until the second trimester to tell my family, hoping to shield my fragile happiness from their inevitable indifference. I was right too. "Well, I suppose that was bound to happen," was my mother's first comment. My father's was, "Does this mean you'll have to give up your studio?" No joy, no excitement. Just a faint, familiar air of disappointment. As my due date approached, Celeste announced she had been nominated for the prestigious Vanguard Architecture Prize. The ceremony was to be held in the gleaming city of Sunfield, a 5-hour drive away, on the exact weekend of my due date. My parents saw no conflict. It was Celeste's moment. "First babies are almost always late, Alara," my mother said, dismissing my concerns. "You should come with us. It will be a wonderful family celebration." My doctor advised strongly against any long-distance travel. The baby had dropped, and labor could begin at any time. When I relayed this, my family's pressure only intensified. "You've always been envious of her success," my mother accused me over the phone. "This is the single biggest night of her career. Can you be supportive for once?" A part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime yearning for a crumb of their approval, caved. Against Liam's strenuous, worried objections and my own better judgment, I agreed. Liam had an obligatory, unmovable professional development weekend he couldn't miss, but he made me promise to call him at the very first sign of anything. As we packed the car on that cool, misty June morning, I couldn't shake a feeling of deep foreboding. I couldn't have imagined how profoundly my world was about to break, and how, in the breaking, I would finally find the strength to piece myself back together. The morning of the trip was classic Port Blossom, a sky the color of a pearl, with a soft drizzle that beaded on the windows of my parents' immaculate SUV. Liam held me tight before I left, his hand resting on the swell of my belly, his brow furrowed with a worry he couldn't hide. "Call me if you feel a single twinge, Alara. I don't care if you think it's nothing. Call me," he insisted, his voice low and urgent. He kissed my forehead, then bent to kiss my stomach. "I love you both. Be safe." My mother honked the horn, a sharp, impatient sound that cut through the quiet morning. "We need to get on the road, Alara. The pass can have traffic." No greeting, no asking how I felt. Just the tyranny of the schedule. My father, Arthur, sat behind the wheel, his gaze already fixed on the road ahead, a man perpetually in transit to his daughter's next achievement. The back seat was Celeste's domain. She was surrounded by a cloud of silk and taffeta encased in garment bags, an arsenal of outfits for her coronation. I was squeezed into the middle row next to a cooler of sparkling water for Celeste and a pile of architectural journals. Her luggage had more legroom than I did. "You look exhausted," were Celeste's first words to me as I maneuvered my 9 months pregnant body into the seat. "The photographers will be there tonight. You should have at least put on some concealer." "Good morning to you, too, Celeste," I murmured, twisting to find a position that didn't send a jolt of pain through my lower back. The first 2 hours passed in a strained silence, punctuated only by Celeste's animated calls to colleagues, discussing networking strategies for the pre-award reception. My parents, Eleanor and Arthur, listened with rapt attention, nodding and smiling at her reflection in the rearview mirror. I watched the familiar green landscape of the coast give way to the denser forests and rising peaks of the mountain pass, already regretting my decision. Around noon, I felt the first tightening. It was a subtle clenching deep in my abdomen, enough to make me catch my breath. "Braxton Hicks," I told myself, "a practice run." But 20 minutes later, another one came, a little stronger, a little more insistent. "Could we stop at the next scenic viewpoint?" I asked during a break in Celeste's calls. "I need to stretch my legs." My mother sighed, a sound of profound inconvenience. "We just stopped for gas an hour ago. Can't you wait? We're trying to beat the weekend rush into Sunfield." "I'm pregnant, Mom," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "My bladder is the size of a grape." "Fine," my father grumbled, flipping the turn signal with an irritated flick of his wrist. The short walk to the restroom brought another contraction, sharp enough this time that I had to stop and lean against the rough-hewn wood of a signpost. An older woman with kind eyes and a backpack noticed. "Everything all right, dear? You're getting close, aren't you?" "Just some practice contractions, I think," I lied, not wanting to worry a stranger. She looked at me shrewdly. "Well, you take it easy. Your body's doing important work." Her simple kindness was so jarring it almost made me cry. In the restroom, I saw the telltale pinkish tinge that my doctor had warned me about. My heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was real. When I returned to the car, they were waiting impatiently, the engine running. Finally, Celeste muttered, not looking up from her phone. "At this rate, we'll miss the cocktail hour entirely." I should have said something then. I should have laid out the evidence, the regular contractions, the physical sign, the deep, instinctual feeling that things were starting. But a lifetime of being told I was dramatic, that my needs were secondary, kept me silent. I climbed back into my cramped seat, my own body a stranger to me, sending signals I was too conditioned to ignore. The next hour was a blur of mounting discomfort. The contractions were coming at regular intervals now, about 15 minutes apart. I tried to breathe through them silently, my hand gripping the armrest, my knuckles white. During one particularly sharp wave of pain, I must have gasped, because Celeste turned to me, her face a mask of annoyance. "Could you please be quiet? I'm trying to go over the key points of my acceptance speech." "Sorry," I whispered, as the pain crested and slowly receded. By the third hour, the contractions were every 10 minutes and impossible to hide. I was shifting constantly, my breath coming in ragged pants. "Elara, for heaven's sake, sit still," my mother snapped from the front seat. "You're making me nervous." I think I might be in labor," I said, the words falling into the climate-controlled silence of the car. My mother laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not. The contractions have been regular for over 2 hours. They're getting stronger." Celeste threw her hands up in a gesture of pure theatrical frustration. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Today? You're doing this today? This is my weekend." My father's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, the first real eye contact he'd made with me all day. His face was a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "Are you sure it's not false labor, Elara? They say that happens a lot with first-time mothers." "I don't think so," I said, and as if on cue, another contraction seized me, harder and deeper than any before. A low, involuntary moan escaped my lips. "Oh my God, she's so dramatic," Celeste said, rolling her eyes. "She's just trying to make this about her. She always does this." I fumbled for my phone to call Liam, my lifeline, my anchor. The screen was black. In my haste and anxiety that morning, I'd forgotten to charge it. The charger Liam had pressed into my hand was for his phone, not mine. "My phone is dead," I said, panic threading my voice. "I need to call Liam. I need to call my doctor. Does anyone have a charger?" "Wrong kind," my father said curtly. "You'll have to wait until the hotel." Another contraction hit, only 7 minutes after the last. Then, as I tried to shift my weight, I felt a sudden, warm gush. The unmistakable sensation of my water breaking. "My water just broke," I announced, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and mortification as the dampness spread across the plush leather seat. The car swerved slightly. "Are you sure?" my father asked, his voice strained. "Yes, I'm sure," I nearly shouted, as another contraction began to build. "You have to take me to a hospital. Now." My mother turned fully in her seat, her face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "The nearest hospital is an hour back the way we came," she said, her voice tight. "We'll miss the entire reception. Celeste needs to be there. It's critical for her career." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Mom, I am having a baby. Your grandchild. Can't you just hold it in for a little while?" Celeste asked, with a stunning lack of awareness. "We could drop you at a hospital in Sunfield after the reception." The absurdity of it was so profound that I might have laughed if a contraction of breathtaking intensity hadn't ripped through me, forcing a cry from deep in my chest. "For God's sake, Arthur, pull over," my mother commanded. "She's making too much noise. Celeste can't concentrate." My father guided the SUV onto the gravel shoulder of the highway. We were on a remote stretch of the mountain pass, surrounded by towering pines and empty sky. The nearest town was a small dot on the map, miles away. Through a haze of pain, I could hear them whispering, their words urgent and hushed. Finally, my mother turned to me, her face set like stone. Look, the venue is only an hour from here. There's a good hospital in Sunfield. We'll drop you at the ER as soon as we get Celeste checked in. No, I gasped, clutching my belly. I need help now. Call an ambulance. My father got out of the car. For one wild, hopeful moment, I thought he was coming to help me, to take my side. Instead, he opened my door, unbuckled my seatbelt, and helped me out of the car. He retrieved my small overnight bag from the back and set it on the gravel beside me. The next town is just a few miles down the road, he said, avoiding my eyes, pointing down the empty highway. Someone will stop for you. You can't just leave me here, I sobbed, the pain of the contractions mingling with the gut-wrenching agony of their betrayal. My mother leaned out her window, her expression cold. Don't be so melodramatic, Alara. This is your sister's moment. You're trying to ruin it. She needs peace and silence to prepare. Let me use your phone, I begged, my hand outstretched. Please, just let me call Liam. We'll call him from the hotel and let him know where to meet you, my father promised, already getting back into the driver's seat. Someone will be along any minute. The last thing I saw as the SUV pulled away was Celeste's face in the back window. She was looking at her reflection, mouthing the words to her acceptance speech. The car rounded a curve, its taillights winking out like dying embers, and I was left alone on the side of the road, a contraction building inside me, utterly and completely abandoned. The silence that descended after the SUV disappeared was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind in the pines and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I was alone, in active labor, on a remote mountain pass. The reality of it was a physical blow, as staggering as any contraction. They had chosen an awards ceremony over me, over their grandchild. The betrayal was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. Panic was a wild animal clawing at the edges of my mind, but I knew I couldn't afford to let it win. My baby was coming, and I was the only one here to welcome her. I had to focus. The air was cool and crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. I dragged my suitcase a few yards off the road to a small clearing beneath a stand of majestic Douglas firs, their thick trunks offering a semblance of shelter. Each step was a monumental effort. Another contraction seized me, and I sank to the ground, leaning my back against the rough bark, my fingers digging into the mossy earth. Breathe, Alara. Just breathe. I remembered Liam's voice from our birthing classes, calm and steady. In through your nose, out through your mouth. When the wave of pain subsided, I took inventory. My suitcase held a change of clothes, a book I wouldn't read, and a toiletry bag. My purse had my dead phone, my wallet, a half-eaten granola bar, and a bottle of water. I rummaged through a side pocket of the suitcase, and my fingers closed around a small, laminated card, the emergency birth plan my doula had insisted I make. At the time, it had felt like an exercise in over-preparedness. Now it was a sacred text. Clean, warm, quiet environment. The forest floor was clean enough, covered in a soft bed of pine needles. It was quiet. It was not warm. Support person. I choked back a sob. My support person was hours away, probably leaving frantic voicemails on my dead phone. My other potential support people had just driven away. Another contraction rolled through me, stronger this time, closer to the last. I timed it with the second hand on my watch. 6 minutes. I remembered the 5-1-1 rule, contractions 5 minutes apart, lasting 1 minute for at least 1 hour. It was time to go to the hospital. The irony was so bitter it tasted like metal. I tried to flag down a logging truck that rumbled past, waving my arms frantically, but the driver just gave a cursory wave back and continued on his way. I was just a woman on the side of the road, an insignificant part of the scenery. My thoughts turned to Liam. He would be worried sick. He would be calling my parents, and what would they tell him? That they'd left me? That they didn't know where I was? The thought of his fear was almost as painful as the contractions. The sun began to dip lower, casting long, golden shafts of light through the trees. The air grew colder. My labor was progressing quickly, faster than the books said a first labor should. The contractions were coming every 4 to 5 minutes now, a relentless rhythm. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I was not going to make it to any town. This baby was coming here. In a moment of clarity between the waves of pain, I remembered my grandmother, a formidable woman who had given birth to my uncle on a kitchen table during a blizzard. A woman's body knows what to do, Alara, she had told me once. You just have to be brave enough to listen to it. I had to be brave. I began to prepare. I spread my cardigan on the softest patch of ground. I took my shoelaces out of my sneakers and sanitized them with hand sanitizer from my purse, along with a small pair of nail scissors. It was a pathetic, makeshift set of tools, but it was all I had. I laid out a clean t-shirt from my bag to wrap the baby in. I took a small sip of water, rationing it carefully. As the dusk deepened, I entered the stage of labor they call transition. The contractions were a firestorm, one on top of the other, with no time for recovery. An overwhelming, primal urge to push took over my body. There was no thought, no choice, just a complete surrender to the force of nature moving through me. Please, I whispered to the silent trees, to the darkening sky, to whatever spirit resided in that wild, lonely place. Please, let us be okay. And in that moment, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. If I could do this, if I could bring my child into the world alone, powered only by my own strength and love, then I could do anything. I could face down my family. I could build a life free from their shadows. I could be the mother this child deserved. The sun had almost set, painting the sky in strokes of violet and rose. In the sacred twilight of that forest cathedral, I braced myself against the ancient trunk of a fir tree and prepared to meet my daughter. The world narrowed to a single point of intense, focused effort. The pain of the contractions was different now, less of an assault and more of a powerful, productive force. My body knew the way. I just had to follow. You can do this, Alara, I said aloud, my voice shaky but firm in the quiet air. We can do this. I remembered the positions from my birthing class, settling into a half-reclining pose against the tree, which allowed me to bear down with each surge. With every push, I felt the baby move lower. It was the hardest work of my life, a raw, elemental struggle. In the brief moments of rest between contractions, my mind flashed to Celeste, likely sipping champagne at her reception, accepting praise. A hot, clarifying anger burned away the last of my fear. My daughter's first moments on this earth would not be defined by their neglect, but by my strength. Then came the ring of fire, an intense, burning sensation as the baby's head began to crown. I remembered the instructor's advice: pant, don't push, let your body stretch slowly. I panted like a cornered animal, fighting every instinct to bear down and end the pain. Slowly, I coached myself. With the next contraction, I felt a great release as her head emerged. Overcome with a strange calm, I reached down and felt for the umbilical cord, relieved to find it wasn't wrapped around her neck. One more, little one, I whispered, gathering every last ounce of my energy. Come on. I gave one final, monumental push, and with a slippery rush, my baby was born, landing safely in my waiting hands. For a moment, there was a deafening silence. She was so small, so perfect, covered in the creamy vernix of the womb. I pulled her onto my chest, her warm, wet skin against mine. She was still, her eyes squeezed shut. Breathe, my love, I begged, my voice cracking. I rubbed her back, clearing her mouth and nose with my finger as I'd seen in videos. Please, baby, cry for me. And then a small cough, followed by the most glorious sound I had ever heard. A thin, reedy wail that echoed through the silent forest. Tears of relief and overwhelming love streamed down my face, washing away the pain and fear. Hello, Rowan, I whispered, the name Liam and I had chosen for its connection to trees, to strength and protection. Hello, my little survivor. I'm your mama. We did it. I worked on autopilot, tying off the umbilical cord with a sanitized shoelace and cutting it with my small scissors. The act was both surreal and profoundly grounding. I wrapped Rowan in the clean t-shirt and held her close, her cries quieting as she felt the beat of my heart. She was here. She was safe. We were both alive. As full darkness fell, a pair of headlights swept across the clearing. A dusty pickup truck slowed and pulled onto the shoulder. A woman in a park ranger's uniform got out, her face etched with concern. "Everything okay over? Oh my God," she said, her flashlight beam landing on me and the tiny, bundled infant in my arms. "Did you just?" "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "We need a hospital." The woman, whose name I would learn was Maya, moved with a gentle efficiency that was a balm to my shattered nerves. She wrapped us both in an emergency blanket from her truck, her hands sure and steady. "I'm a trained wilderness first responder," she explained, her voice calm as she checked me over. "You both look remarkably good, all things considered. But let's get you properly looked after." As she drove us down the mountain, the rhythmic thump of the tires on the pavement was a soothing counterpoint to the storm in my soul. My own family had left me to face this primal ordeal alone. A stranger, a guardian of the forest, had been my savior. Maya handed me her phone. "You should call someone." "The baby's father." "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "My husband." I thought of my parents and Celeste. They would find out what happened. They would have to live with what they had done, with the knowledge of the sacred, terrifying, beautiful moment they had so casually discarded. Looking down at Rowan, asleep against my chest, her tiny face serene, I made a silent vow. She would never, ever have to question her worth. She would never feel like an afterthought. The cycle of conditional love and casual neglect ended here, tonight, on this mountain. With me. The emergency room was a cacophony of light and sound after the deep quiet of the forest. Maya's call ahead had prepared them, and a team of nurses and doctors descended on us with practiced efficiency. A kind-faced nurse named Grace took Rowan from my arms, her touch so gentle it made me want to weep. "She's beautiful," Grace said, smiling at me. "You're both so strong." I was wheeled into a trauma bay, and the next few hours were a blur of medical procedures and gentle questions. Dr. Evans, the attending physician, had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that I found deeply reassuring. "You did an incredible job, Alara," she said, stitching a minor tear. "But you should never have been in that position." The questions about my circumstances were unavoidable. When I explained, in a flat, exhausted voice, that my family had left me on the side of the highway to attend an award ceremony, the atmosphere in the room changed. The professional hustle paused. Grace, the nurse, stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. "They what?" she asked, before catching herself. "I'm sorry. I've been a labor and delivery nurse for 20 years. I thought I'd heard everything." A hospital social worker, a woman named Ms. Albright with compassionate eyes, was called in. She explained, with careful, deliberate language, that what my family had done likely constituted criminal negligence and child endangerment. The hospital, she said, might be legally obligated to file a report with the authorities. The thought that my parents could face legal consequences was staggering, a possibility I hadn't even considered. Liam arrived looking like a man who had stared into the abyss. He had broken every speed limit, his face pale with a terror that turned to pure, unadulterated rage as I told him the full story. He burst through the door of my private room, where they had finally settled me with Rowan sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside the bed. "Alara," he breathed, gathering me into his arms so carefully, as if I might shatter. He saw Rowan, and his anger dissolved into a look of absolute wonder. "Is that our daughter?" I whispered. "Rowan." He touched her tiny, perfect hand, and tears streamed down his face. "She's incredible," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Then he looked at me, his eyes blazing. They left you out there to die." "But we didn't," I said, touching his cheek. "We're okay." "No thanks to them," he growled, his hands clenching into fists. "Where are they?" "I'm going to call them." "Wait," I said, catching his arm. "Let me handle this." My way. Just then, my phone, now fully charged, lit up with my mother's name. Liam's jaw tightened. I took a deep breath and answered, putting it on speaker. Ilara, darling, my mother's voice chirped, loud and bright from the celebratory dinner she was clearly at. How are you? Did you find a hospital? The ceremony was a triumph. Celeste's speech was breathtaking. The casual, self-congratulatory tone, after what I had endured, was breathtaking in its own way. I had the baby, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. On the side of the road. Where you left me. There was a brief silence. What? Already? But is she healthy? What did you name her? Mrs. Hayes, Liam interjected, his voice dangerously low and controlled. Your daughter and your granddaughter could have died. Do you understand that? Oh, Liam, don't be so dramatic, my mother said with a sigh. We knew someone would stop. It all worked out for the best, didn't it? What's done is done, my father's voice cut in. We'll come by the hospital tomorrow. Allison is very excited to meet her new niece. Allison. I repeated, a cold, hard anger solidifying in my chest. After what you all did, you think you can just show up for a photo op? I understand you're hormonal right now, Ilara, my mother said, her voice turning sharp, but there's no need to be ungrateful. Ungrateful? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Family doesn't leave family to give birth on a mountain. I don't want to see you. Not until I'm ready. I ended the call, my hand trembling. Liam looked at me, his face a mask of fury. They don't get it. They actually, truly do not understand what they did. They never have, I said, a lifetime of hurts crystallizing into a single, hard truth. But this time is different. This time, I have Rowan to protect. The next morning, they appeared at my hospital room door, looking rested and triumphant. My father was holding Celeste's gleaming Vanguard trophy. Celeste was already scrolling through her phone, curating photos from the night before. There you are, my mother said, placing a pastel-colored gift bag on my bedside table. Celeste brought her award to show you. Isn't it stunning? I'm getting so much engagement on the posts from last night, Celeste said, looking up briefly. Mind if I get a picture with the baby? A new niece is great for the brand. That was it. The final straw. The moment my lifetime of quiet acceptance shattered for good. No, I said, my voice clear and steady. You will not be taking pictures of my daughter for your brand. They all stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. You forfeited the right to be a part of these moments when you drove away from me yesterday, I continued. You don't get to participate in the joy after you abandoned me in the terror. We apologized for that, my father said stiffly. No, you didn't, I replied. You made excuses. You told me not to be dramatic. You prioritized a piece of metal over my life and the life of my child. I picked up my phone. I've been thinking a lot about what Ms. Albright, the social worker, told me. About criminal negligence. Their faces paled. Fear, real and palpable, finally entered the room. You wouldn't, my mother whispered. Think of Celeste's career, my father pleaded. The bad press would ruin her. I was thinking about my daughter's life yesterday, I said, my gaze sweeping over each of them. I was thinking about how it might be ruined before it even had a chance to begin. The room was silent, save for Rowan's soft breathing. What do you want, Ilara? My father finally asked, the businessman in him taking over. I looked at Liam, who gave me a subtle, supportive nod. I looked at my daughter, my fierce, beautiful Rowan. I had all the power now, and I knew exactly what to do with it. I want you to understand, I said. I want you to sit here and listen, without interrupting, while I tell you exactly what it was like to be alone on that mountain. Then I want each of you to apologize. A real apology that acknowledges the specific harm you caused. And then, we are going to establish boundaries. Hard, clear boundaries about how you will treat me, my husband, and my daughter from this day forward. Lily will be an equal in this family, not a footnote in Celeste's story. This is your one and only chance to have a relationship with us. You have until I am discharged from this hospital to decide if you're capable of that. They stared at me, stripped of their usual confidence. For the first time in my life, they were not in control. I was. As they filed out of the room to talk, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The ground beneath my feet, which had felt so unstable for so long, was finally solid. I had found my voice. I had found my strength. I had given birth not just to a child, but to myself. 2 years later, our backyard was filled with laughter and the scent of freshly cut grass. Rowan, my fierce, bright-eyed daughter, was celebrating her second birthday, toddling between guests with a crown of wildflowers askew on her dark curls. Liam stood at the grill, flipping burgers and smiling, his eyes rarely straying from our daughter. The journey from that stark white hospital room to this sun-drenched afternoon had been a slow and challenging ascent. After my ultimatum, my family had chosen to stay. The conversation that followed was the most honest and painful of our lives. There were tears, defensive arguments, and finally, a series of fractured, heartfelt apologies. My father, in particular, seemed broken by the reality of his actions, and he was the one who insisted on family therapy. The sessions were grueling. Decades of dysfunction were unearthed and examined. Celeste struggled the most, forced to confront a world that didn't revolve around her. But slowly, painstakingly, things began to shift. It wasn't a magical transformation, but a gradual, deliberate effort to build something new from the wreckage of the old. My mother approached me as I was lighting the candles on Rowan's butterfly-shaped cake. "She's so full of light, Alara," she said, her voice quiet. She handed me a small, clumsily wrapped gift. It wasn't for Rowan, it was for me. Inside was a simple silver locket. On one side was a tiny, perfect photo of Rowan. On the other was a faded picture of me as a baby. "I found this the other day," she said, her eyes misty. "I realized I barely remembered you at that age. I was so busy, with everything. I don't want to miss this. I don't want to miss her." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real. "I'd like that, Mom," I said, my throat tight. Later, as the party wound down, Celeste sat beside me on the porch steps. She'd recently left her high-pressure firm to teach architecture at a community college. "I want to be a good aunt," she said, her gaze on Rowan, who was trying to share a piece of soggy cake with our dog. "The kind who shows up. Not for the photo op, but for the messy, everyday stuff." "She would love that," I said, and for the first time, I believed it was possible. As twilight settled over our little garden, Liam wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. We watched our daughter, our little survivor, chase fireflies across the lawn. The story of her birth was a harrowing one, but it was also our origin story. It was the moment the earth shifted, the moment I stopped asking for love and started demanding respect. It was the moment I learned that my quiet, watercolor world had a strength all its own, a resilience as profound as any mountain. My family had been made to face what they had done, to beg for a forgiveness they had to earn, day by day. But the most important change hadn't been in them, it had been in me. In giving birth to Rowan, I had found the strength to protect her, and in doing so, I had finally learned to protect myself. "Mama," Rowan cried, running toward us, her hands outstretched and sticky with frosting. I scooped her into my arms, burying my face in her soft hair. In her embrace, I felt the steady, unbreakable rhythm of a love that was unconditional, a family that was chosen, and a future that we would build together, one messy, beautiful, sun-drenched day at a time. The cycle was broken. We were free.